Welcome back to Elevate. I'm Bella, and I'm here to teach you everything I've learned about creatine in the last 48 hours. Creatine has been heavily discussed on the internet. There's a lot of mixtures of information out there, some of them true, some of them false. And I'm here to let you know what the research is saying, so then you can make the best decision for yourself based on what your life look like, okay? We can all walk away knowing a little bit more about creatine today. We're going to get into what it is, what it does, who should take it, who shouldn't, the dosages, the side effects. We're getting all that. All right. So, for starters, creatine, what is it? Is it a drug? Is it a steroid? If you're like me, your first intro to creatine was probably from a gym bro or gym sis telling you it's gonna help you get gains, help you build up a donkadonk, help you get big muscles or whatever. And you're like, ooh, is this one of them steroids? Like, I was a little scared. Because you know the gym community can get into some shenanigans with what they take. So rest assured, creatine is not a steroid or a drug. It is something that our body actually naturally produces. It is a string of a few amino acids, but it's not a protein. It's just a molecule. It gets made in like the kidneys, the liver, the pancreas. And then from there, 95% of it ends up in our skeletal muscle, where it plays a very important role. And we'll get into that. It also goes into our brain, primarily the liver cells, heart cells, and other neurons. Our bodies make about a gram a day. Our kidneys excrete the end product, which is creatinine, which you might have seen on your blood panel. But that's not really sufficient, it seems, for what our muscles may need, especially if we're doing any type of high output activities. Okay. So the rest of the creatine we're expected to get from our diet. The average person, the average meat eater or fish eater gets about 1 to 2 grams of creatine a day. And that leaves our muscles at about 60 to 80% saturation, depending on like what we're eating, the quality, how much. So if 1 to 2 grams of creatine in the diet a day is 60 to 80% saturated, you got to think we probably need to supplement if we're not eating meat or fish, or if we have higher energy demands, like if you are an athlete, if you are sprinting, if you're doing these short bursts of intense exercise, or even if you're just under greater stressors in life, if you're recovering from a disease, like, or an injury, or anything that's just requiring extra from you. If you're sleep deprived, like, there's a lot of things out here that are stressing us. We know that. I don't have to tell you that. We know. We know. But are we getting enough of this creatine? So we know where creatine comes from, but what does it actually do? Like, from a very simplistic standpoint, when creatine is too low, our cognitive and physical performance suffer. What creatine does is it helps our bodies regenerate ATP, which is the energy currency of our body. So during high energy demand states, creatine plays an important role in helping that ATP get regenerated quickly for us. So this ATP regeneration in states of high demand is important for explosive movements and intense training, like your max, right? But it also has some roles for when you're not in your max, and that's something that we're gonna get into. All right, let's get into what creatine does while you exercise in particular. So as I said, creatine helps the muscles sustain maximal efforts for longer because it's recycling our ATP, our energy currency. But at a certain point, about 6 to 8 seconds of this maximal effort, it gives out. It's not going to be able to keep going and doing that. So then we enter anaerobic glycolysis, which is the very fun point where we start developing lactic acid, which if like that's when you start hurting, that's when you start getting fatigued, that's when you start tapping out. And so that's important to know because that means that the more saturated our muscles are with creatine, the longer we can sustain this high energy effort before it gets to that point where we're starting to get this fatigue. So that's why it's so important for athletes and people practicing intense workout regimens. On top of that, creatine also helps increase glycogen replenishment, which helps with sub-maximal efforts. So you're not maxing out. Creatine's main selling point was that it'll help you through these intense efforts, But it turns out it actually also helps with recovery and submaximal efforts through the glycogen replenishment. Beyond that glycogen replenishment, creatine doesn't have any like direct performance effect on endurance sports. Like in the moment of you doing the activity, it's not going to help your VO2 max or whatever. It's not going to do anything. It might help you recover. From what I'm seeing, it probably help you recover and in other areas to avoid like injury and whatnot. But at the same time, it might make you gain a little bit of mass, especially if you load it, which we'll get more into that. So that's a trade-off you have to consider, especially with like distance running and all that, right? Now, getting more into what creatine does for recovery. Research has shown that creatine can accelerate recovery time. It does so by reducing muscle inflammation, soreness, cramping, dehydration, strains. It can also reduce risk of muscle injury, and it can help with muscle atrophy during periods of immobilization. So that is how creatine generally has been shown through research to benefit people engaging in physical activity. But on top of that, creatine is not all about your muscles. As we said, it's in your brain too. It helps with fatigue, memory, and attention. And it does so by increasing the available energy in our brain cells during mental and physical stress. There was a whole study dedicated to sleep deprivation and creatine, and they found that after forcing people to be sleep deprived, they couldn't even watch nothing. They were just sitting in a chair, and this person was looking at them like, "You better not sleep." I would lose my mind. But anyway, these people sacrificed their sanity briefly for us to find out that essentially, when you take a higher dose of creatine after a certain stressor on your brain like that, it significantly reduces the negative effects of that sleep deprivation or that stressor. So it helps restore our cognitive function in the midst of stress, which is great to know. Okay, so creatine ain't all about exercise. So, how much should you take? When should you take it? What should you take it with? All these things. Let's get into it. So, you have two options. There's two schools, right? You're either taking it daily or you're doing a loading phase. Now, the loading phase idea is that you can kind of saturate your muscles more quickly than if you were to just take it daily. So for a loading approach, you do 0.3 grams per kilogram, not pounds, kilogram a day for 5 to 7 days. So for me, I would end up taking about 20 grams a day for 5 to 7 days to be saturated if I were to do this approach. And then you follow it with a maintenance dose of 0.03 grams per kilogram per day, which would be about 2 grams for me. However, I personally would not take this approach unless you're really locked in on like, oh, I have like a specific competition or something that is super important. I want to just max out my performance for that. Like maybe, but honestly, even then, I'm not sure because one of the side effects of creatine is water retention, which is temporary, right? But it's more common if you do the loading phase because you're like putting all this creatine in you and it's affecting like the osmosis because it's going into your cells and then drawing the water in there. So people don't pee as much and they gain a little bit weight. And then on top of that, that reduces your range of motion. In the athletic world, range of motion is important. So I'm not entirely sure if loading phase is really worth it. But I mean, you know what? It depends on the person, right? So do what works for you. Me personally, I would just do daily intake and let it gradually build up. With the daily intake, you do 0.1 grams per kilogram of body weight, or you just do 3 to 5 grams. Fine, if I were to do the calculation, would be 7 grams. I just do 5. That's the effective dose. Which creatine format should you take right now? Creatine monohydrate is the most researched form of creatine, and it is very effective, bioavailable, and all of that. Like, so I would just stick to that until they further research these other ones they're developing to see if they're actually even worth it or more effective than just the good old monohydrate, you know? But keep an eye out because they're developing some stuff that might be better for absorption or just better for avoiding GI upset that can sometimes happen when, especially when people are taking higher doses. Now, as far as what to take it with and the timing, they say, taking it with a carb can boost absorption potentially. But there's not really any evidence as far as like the timing to take it. That's not really something that is very clear yet, whether you take it before exercise or after exercise. So I would just do it whenever it's convenient for you or whenever feels right to you. because they're not entirely sure. The other thing you can do is you can cycle it. You could stop taking it certain times of the year where you're not doing as much output, and then up it again when you're in your key performance periods. This is supposed to maybe enhance effectiveness, but it's not like the most clear. I don't think they know everything quite yet. But you could try it. I would just let you know that it takes 4 to 6 weeks for your creatine to go back to baseline after you've started taking it, because your body kind of adjusts to you taking it and doesn't make as much. So it takes 4 to 6 weeks to go back. So I wouldn't test the whole getting off of it during a very important time of performance if you're like an athlete or anything, you know? Okay. Now let's get into the side effects. If you are somebody with a kidney or liver condition, or you're on like prescription medications, or you're prepubescent, you haven't hit puberty yet, or you're pregnant, I would talk to a doctor for sure before I did this, just in case. And the reason is, okay, for the kidney and medications group, it's just because those are the only groups that have experienced negative effects for real. And we'll get more into that. Don't forget, we'll get more into it, okay? For the prepubescent and pregnant groups, it's really just because there hasn't been enough research for those groups. It's not necessarily like to be honest, the animal studies and some of the human studies have shown like it's probably fine. Like in this case, they just have to be very careful about what they recommend to those groups. The side effects of creatine are very short term, from what the research has shown anyway. The most common one, as I mentioned before, is water retention, which is temporary. It's more common if you do a loading phase. It can reduce your range of motion in your joints. The other thing is gut disturbances. This can basically be addressed by just reducing your dosage. But me personally, like, I don't really have that experience. Not that I've really noticed, and I have a whole gut condition. So, I, if you take a regular dose, I don't think it should be that serious. The last thing is, as I mentioned, that it takes 4 to 6 weeks to return to your baseline levels after you stop taking it. So you have to just be aware and plan accordingly. Are there any differences between men and women? It seems like men and women can take a similar dose, 3 to 5 grams. Apparently, our creatine producing enzymes and whatnot like fluctuate throughout our cycles, which is another thing of, just another day of being a woman, right? But apparently it fluctuates. They don't fully understand like how all this works and how all this should affect our supplementation yet, obviously, right? They're just starting to research us for real. We know that. We know. But it has shown that it can help women with like fatigue during the luteal phase, or even like I think there was one thing on sprint performance during the luteal phase was improved, but it wasn't really improved as much by creatine in other phases of the cycle. So that's good to know for our athletic girlies or our sprinting girlies. It can also help with depression in women, because women are more likely to have depression, and women are also more likely to have less creatine in our frontal lobe compared to men. And so that could be important. If you're struggling with depression or fatigue, you might want to consider it. It can also help women towards menopause to prevent osteoporosis when paired with exercise. So animal studies have suggested that creatine might be helpful for pregnant women in reducing complications associated with low cellular energy during pregnancy and after birth, so postpartum, right? It's not like entirely greenlit to just be like, oh, all the pregnant women should take this. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, don't just talk to your doctor or do your own research. You know what I'm saying? Like, do what's right for you, but that's what they're saying. So, it might be some cool developments in the future. But finally, we're going to get into some of the misinformation that's out there in regards to creatine. This might reiterate some of the things we've already got into, but it's important. So, one of the things that deterred me from taking creatine was the suggestion that it might affect your kidneys. It turns out that a lot of that idea came from some isolated cases where essentially people either had renal disease and were taking creatine, or people were being told to take really high doses of creatine, or people were taking medications that interacted with creatine and made toxins for the kidneys. Those were the cases that led to like kidney complications, which are very specific and individual. Meanwhile, in the 20 years of experimental and controlled studies that took place after those instances on the kidneys and how creatine affects the kidneys, there's been no like adverse effects of creatine on healthy people, even with 5 years of continuous use. So as of right now, it seems like there's very little evidence to really suggest that creatine would negatively affect the kidneys unless you're in these groups of people. Creatinine will increase in your kidney measures, but that's just like because there's more creatine in your body, you know? So I think if you're really concerned about that, but you still are like maybe a vegan or vegetarian or somebody who's not getting enough creatine, or maybe you're an athlete or whatever, if you're really concerned, I would just lean towards taking 3 grams, like take the minimal dose. For two, there has been some speculation in the streets that it causes male hair loss by increasing testosterone or DHT. And this came from one study back in the day that is yet to be replicated because their numbers were a little funky. Long story short, a lot of 12 studies happened after the fact on whether or not creatine really affects testosterone levels, and it doesn't. Not like anything that is significant or really differs from what exercise already does to testosterone levels. So, men, it's okay. If you go bald, blame your daddy, not creatine, okay? For three, there's an idea that creatine causes dehydration and muscle cramping. There was a whole study that they did on D1 football players in a hot, humid environment, and they were trying to see if creatine really caused these things. One group got a drink with the creatine, another group got a placebo drink, and they recorded different occurrences, different events, and compared them. And they found a significant difference. So in those who were taking the creatine, they had significantly less cramp and dehydration, tightness, strains, and total injuries compared to the placebo group. So do with that what you will. Who is creatine good for at the end of the day? We know it's good for athletes and people who are leading active lifestyles. It's also good for people who are recovering from muscle injuries, brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, which makes it really great for people in contact sport. Another group it can benefit are people who are losing muscle due to age, illness, or immobilization, as it can combat that muscle atrophy, which can significantly deteriorate someone's quality of life. It's also great for people who are vegans or vegetarians because we're not getting the creatine from our diet. And on top of that, fun fact, when we're not getting B12 from supplements or nutritional yeast, then our bodies aren't even making enough creatine because B12 is involved in the synthesis of a creatine precursor. So you're getting double screwed if you're not taking something. The more you know. I wish I knew this sooner. Also, it's good for people with depression and chronic fatigue to consider. And on top of all of this, there has been research showing that creatine can serve as a aid or a supplemental treatment for people who have neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's or Huntington's, and for people who have cardiovascular disease. It's supposed to help them have an easier time exerting themselves in exercise as well. So yeah, creatine has a lot of benefits for a lot of different groups. It's not just for athletes, even though for athletes it's a potentially huge benefit, especially for athletes who are practicing vegan or vegetarian lifestyles. At the end of the day, you have to make the decision that best serves your health and whatever feels best to you. But I hope that this video will give you a better idea of what decision to make for yourself, for your health, for your performance, whatever you may need. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions or any other topics you would like for me to cover. And make sure to like, follow, subscribe so I can keep making great content for y'all. All right, bye.